Hey everyone, if you're new here, I'm glad you found your way to this channel. It's a place for stories about the messy, complicated lines we draw in our lives and families. If this resonates, feel free to like and subscribe. It truly helps. Today's story isn't about dramatic revenge, though the title might suggest it. It's about a quiet, tectonic shift that happened over years, culminating in a single, surreal afternoon. It's about the house I thought was my anchor, the family I kept trying to belong to, and the day I realized I had to change the locks on more than just my front door. The sunlight was wrong. That was my first disjointed thought as I stood in the driveway, the gravel crunching under my boots. It was a flat, wintry light, the kind that bleaches color instead of adding it, and it poured over the "For Sale" sign planted defiantly next to the porch steps. The house looked back at me, a quiet, empty shell. I'd just come from the final walkthrough with my realtor, Sarah. The closing was in 3 days. All that was left inside were a few cleaning supplies and the echo of my own footsteps. I remember the cold air biting at my ears, the smell of damp pine from the woods behind the property, and a profound, almost unsettling silence. I'd lived here for 7 years. I'd painted every wall, planted the now overgrown lavender by the walkway, and learned the specific groan of the third stair from the top. And now, it was no longer mine. My phone buzzed in my coat pocket. I fumbled it out with gloved hands, expecting Sarah with a last-minute question, but it was my mother's name on the screen. I felt a familiar, hollow pull in my stomach, a mix of obligation and low-grade anxiety. I swiped to answer. "Hi, Mom." "Hi, sweetie." Her voice was bright, threaded with a forced cheer I'd come to recognize as a precursor to a request. "What are you up to?" "Just finishing up some errands," I said, my eyes fixed on the sold sticker slapped across the realtor's sign. The lie came easily, automatically. I hadn't told them. I hadn't told my parents or my sister about listing the house, about the offer, about any of it. The decision felt too fragile, too mine, too exposed to their collective gravitational pull. "That's nice. Listen, your father and I were thinking. You know your sister's been having such a hard time since the breakup." My older sister, Chloe. Her latest relationship had imploded 2 months prior, and as it always did, her crisis had become the family's central organizing principle. "She's just feeling so cooped up in her apartment. We thought it would be so good for her to get out of the city for a bit, have some quiet. You've got all that space." I closed my eyes. I knew what was coming. The script was so well rehearsed. "So," my mother continued, her tone dipping into a confiding warmth, "we gave her the keys to your house, the spare set we've always had. We told her she could stay there for a week or two, just to clear her head. You won't even know she's there. It'll be such a help to her. We knew you wouldn't mind." The world seemed to tilt, just slightly. The cold air felt thinner. I looked at the keys in my other hand, my own set, soon to be handed over to the new owners. I looked at the house, empty and sold, and I saw, with crystal clarity, my sister's car pulling into this driveway, her using that old tarnished key to try and open a door that was, in every way that mattered, already locked. "Mom," I said, and my voice sounded strange to me, calm and distant. "When did you give her the keys?" "Oh, just this morning. She was so relieved. She's probably packing now. She might head over tomorrow or the next day." Isn't that perfect? A wave of surreal vertigo washed over me. They had given away access to a life I was already halfway out of. They had made plans for my space, my sanctuary, without a single thought of consulting me. It wasn't malicious. That was the most disorienting part. It was simply operational. My house, in their minds, was just an extension of the family inventory, a resource to be allocated to whoever they deemed was in the most immediate need. My autonomy was an abstract concept, consistently overridden by the more tangible drama of the moment. "I need to call you back, Mom," I said, my mind racing. "Oh, of course, you're busy. Just call your sister and work out the details, okay? Love you." The line went dead. I stood there, the phone going cold in my hand. The winter quiet was no longer peaceful. It was charged, waiting. I had 2 days, maybe less, before Chloe showed up with her suitcase and her grief and a key that no longer fit. The collision wasn't just coming, It had already been set in motion by hands that believed they were helping. All I could do now was stand at the epicenter and wait for the tremors to reach the surface. I got in my car, but I didn't drive away. I just sat, the heater blasting, watching my breath fog the windshield, and tried to steady myself for what was about to happen. This moment, this quiet, wrong-lit afternoon, was the product of a lifetime of similar moments, each one a brick in a wall I was finally learning to see. To understand that wall, you have to go back to the beginning, to the house I grew up in. It was a warm, cluttered, noisy house full of good intentions and unevenly distributed attention. My father, a kind but perpetually weary high school teacher, lived inside a bubble of quiet distraction. His world was lesson plans and the newspaper, and he navigated the family's emotions like a man tiptoeing through a room full of sleeping cats, carefully, hoping not to disturb anything. My mother was the sun around which we all orbited, but her light and heat were directed by a powerful, unshakable conviction. That family was a single organism, and Chloe was its most sensitive, vital limb. Chloe was 18 months older than me, diagnosed with severe allergies and asthma as a toddler, which bloomed into a kind of generalized delicateness as we grew. A headache wasn't just a headache. It was a potential migraine that required dim lights and hushed voices. A bad grade wasn't a disappointment. It was a crisis of confidence that needed weeks of delicate handling. Her emotions were weather systems we all learned to forecast and accommodate. I remember one vivid summer afternoon. I was maybe 10, building a detailed fort out of couch cushions and blankets in the living room, a project that had taken me hours. Chloe came in, saw it, and wanted to play. I, flush with the pride of creation, said it was my fort and she could visit, but I got to make the rules. She burst into tears, not tantrum tears, but heartbreaking, gasping sobs. From the kitchen, my mother's voice called, "What happened?" "She won't let me play in her fort," Chloe wailed. My mother appeared in the doorway, her hands on her hips. She didn't ask me for my side. She looked at my sister's devastated face, then at my defiant stance amidst the cushions. "For heaven's sake," she sighed, a sigh heavy with the burden of managing us. "It's just a fort. Let your sister play. She's had a hard day." "What kind of hard day?" I muttered, my victory crumbling. "Don't take that tone. You have to be kinder. She needs you to be the strong one." That phrase became the mantra of my childhood. You have to be the strong one. It was delivered not as a compliment, but as an instruction. My role was solidified. I was the low-maintenance child, the adaptable one, the one whose disappointments were smaller, whose hurts were less sharp, whose needs could be deferred. I learned to swallow my wants. If there was one last cookie, I'd let Chloe have it, anticipating the praise I'd get for being so thoughtful. If we were choosing a movie, I'd suggest her favorite to avoid the sigh of having to manage her disappointment. My achievements, a good report card, winning a part in the school play, were acknowledged with a quick, "That's nice, honey," before the conversation swung back to whether Chloe's new friend was really including her at lunch. It wasn't that they didn't love me. I never doubted they loved me. But love, in that house, was a finite resource that flowed along the path of least resistance, and Chloe's needs were a canyon that swallowed the river whole. My father would sometimes catch my eye over the dinner table during one of Chloe's dramatic recitations of a social slight. He'd give me a small, almost imperceptible smile, a tiny secret of solidarity. But he never intervened. To intervene would be to disrupt the ecosystem, and the peace he craved was maintained by my mother's management of Chloe's world. So I built my own inner fort, much sturdier than the couch cushion one. I learned to find validation in my own company, in books, in solitary projects. But the blueprint was set. In this family, my space, my things, my emotional territory were always negotiable if Chloe needed them. It was just what you did for family. It was how we showed love. I carried that blueprint with me like a hidden, weightless handbook, not yet realizing how deeply its instructions were written into my bones. When I left for college, it felt like a jailbreak. A quiet, polite jailbreak, but a jailbreak nonetheless. I chose a university 3 states away, a distance that felt both terrifying and necessary. The first year was a brutal lesson in my own conditioning. I'd hear a roommate cry over a failed test and feel a physical compulsion to fix it, to manage her emotions. I'd hesitate to assert a preference for where to eat, instinctively deferring. And the phone calls home were a weekly tether to the old dynamic. "How's Chloe?" I'd ask, the script automatic. "Oh, struggling," my mother would say, her voice taut with worry. "The transition is so hard for her. Her roommate is so messy, and you know how that affects her anxiety. Maybe you could call her. She could really use her sister right now." So I'd call Chloe. I'd listen for an hour as she detailed the injustices of dorm life. I'd offer advice she wouldn't take and hang up feeling drained, but also needed. It was a familiar toxic currency. My independence felt like a selfish act, a hoarding of resources, my time, my emotional energy that rightly belonged to the family collective. After graduation, I took a job in a mid-sized city further from home. I scraped together a down payment for a small, fixer-upper cottage on the outskirts of town. It was mine. The act of buying it felt like a declaration of personhood. I painted, I sanded floors, I killed spiders, I planted a garden. It was the first thing in my life that was unequivocally, contractually mine. No one could give away my time here. No one could reassign its rooms based on need. But the family gravity was powerful. Visits were always framed around Chloe. She'd come, often trailing some fresh personal disaster, and our parents would inevitably say, "Let her stay with you for the weekend. Your house is so calming." And I, programmed to be the strong one, the stable one, would say yes. She'd fill the space with her chaos, clothes on every surface, dramatic phone calls that echoed through the small rooms, subtle criticisms of my rustic decor. She'd leave, and I'd spend days reclaiming the silence, feeling a vague resentment that I then felt guilty for. The spare keys were a symbolic surrender I didn't even realize I was making. When my parents visited the first time, my mother said, "You should give us a set just in case of an emergency." It seemed reasonable, prudent. I handed them over. It was a physical token of trust, but also, I see now, a relic of the old blueprint. It granted them access not just to my house, but to the idea that my life was still a subsidiary of the family system. They used them a handful of times, once to drop off a surprise birthday gift when I was at work, once to let in a plumber when I was out of town. Each time, they told me after the fact, "Oh, we left a casserole in your fridge. Use the key. Hope that's okay." It was always framed as a favor, a blessing. And how could I protest a blessing? The boundaries were soft, porous, and always defended with the shield of family love. I was building my own life brick by brick, but I'd left a key under the mat for the wrecking ball. The turning point didn't arrive with a bang. It arrived with a slow, sinking realization, like noticing a crack in your foundation that's been there for years, silently widening. It was last fall. I'd been promoted at work, a demanding but rewarding step up. I was dating someone, Mark, who was kind and respectful of my time. For the first time, my life felt integrated, balanced, and self-directed. Then, Chloe lost her job. It was a corporate layoff, not her fault, but it triggered a full-scale existential meltdown. The phone calls escalated. My parents' anxiety became a constant hum in the background of my life. The solution, they decided, was for Chloe to reset. And the perfect place for a reset, of course, was my home. My mother called, her voice brimming with the relief of having found a plan. "She can stay with you for a month or two, just until she gets on her feet. It'll be good for her to be away from the city, and you have that lovely guest room." A month or two, the thought sent a chill through me. Not just because of the disruption, but because of the utter assumption. They weren't asking. They were presenting a solution they had already crafted, in which my home was a crucial, passive component. "Mom, I can't do that," I said, my heart pounding. It was the first direct refusal I'd ever issued in this context. Silence. Then, "Why on earth not? I have a lot going on at work. Mark and I, it's just not a good time." "But family is always the right time," she said, her tone shifting from confused to gently reproachful. "She's your sister. She needs you. What's going on with you that you've become so unavailable?" There it was. My boundary was not a reasonable limit. It was a moral failing, a character flaw. Unavailable. The word hung in the air. I stammered, tried to explain my new responsibilities, but my reasons sounded hollow and selfish even to my own ears, filtered through a lifetime of that narrative. We settled on a 2-week visit. Those 2 weeks were a microcosm of my entire childhood. My food disappeared. My schedule was dictated by her moods. She offered unsolicited advice on my career and my relationship. My home was no longer my own. It was a stage for her crisis. When she left, the silence felt wounded. And I was furious, not just at her, but at myself. For my resentment, for my inability to say no cleanly, for the part of me that still felt guilty for wanting my own uninterrupted life. A week later, I was having a drink with Mark. I was venting, my words tangled with frustration and shame. He listened quietly, then said something that changed everything. "You know," he said, his voice careful, "you're allowed to just be the main character in your own life. You don't have to keep giving her the starring role in your story or the keys to your set." It was like a lock clicking open. The main character in my own life. It sounded so simple, so obvious. But it was a revelation. I had spent decades as a supporting actor, a stagehand, in the dramatic production of my family. My house wasn't my set, it was just a convenient location for their play. The keys I'd given out weren't just metal, they were permissions, and I had the right to revoke them. I drove home that night, walked through my quiet rooms, and saw it all with new eyes. The peace I'd built was provisional, always vulnerable to invasion by a family that saw my stability not as something to celebrate, but as a reservoir to be tapped. I loved this house, but it was also the physical embodiment of a dynamic that was choking me. I sat at my kitchen table, the one I'd refinished myself, and a wild, terrifying, and perfectly clear thought formed. What if I sold it? Not as an act of revenge, but as an act of reclamation. A definitive, irreversible step into my own story. It would be a statement so concrete no one could argue with it, misinterpret it, or guilt me out of it. The house would be gone, the keys would be useless, the decision for once would be entirely, unquestionably mine. I called a realtor the next morning. The process of selling a house is a profound exercise in detachment. You stop seeing it as a home and start seeing it as a system. The roof, the furnace, the foundation cracks. You depersonalize it for strangers to walk through and imagine their own lives within its walls. As I painted walls neutral colors, packed away personal photos, and fixed minor flaws, I was also psychologically packing away the old version of myself, the one who waited for permission, who conflated self-erasure with love. I told no one in my family. This was my secret, my sacred project. I needed to complete this act for myself without the static of their opinions, their worries, their inevitable attempts to recenter themselves in my decision. But where will we stay when we visit? What will Chloe do if she needs a place? I could hear the questions already, and I couldn't let them in. Not yet. The market was fast. The house listed on a Tuesday. I had multiple offers by Saturday, and I accepted a strong, clean offer from a young couple. The closing was set for 6 weeks out. A strange, powerful calm settled over me. Every signature, every inspection was a brick in a new wall, a boundary made of legal documents and financial transactions. It was real. Of course, the family system didn't go quiet. Chloe, adrift again after a short-lived new job didn't work out, was a frequent topic. My parents' calls were heavy with shared concern. I'd listen, offer vague sympathies, and quietly continue packing a box of books in the background. The first real tremor came about 3 weeks before closing. My mother called, her voice bright with a new solution. "We've been thinking. Chloe is just drowning in that tiny apartment. It's so dark. What if she moved in with you? Not just a visit, but properly. She could pay you a little rent, help out. It would give her time to really figure out her next move. And you'd have the company." I felt the old script rise in my throat, the urge to placate, to find a gentle letdown. But I was standing in my half-empty living room, looking at boxes labeled New Life. "No, Mom," I said. My voice was even, final. "That's not going to happen." "Why not?" The brightness vanished, replaced by blunt frustration. "Because this is my home. and I need it to be just mine right now. That sounds so lonely. And selfish, honestly. She's family. We're supposed to help each other. I am helping, I said, a new steel in my tone, by not enabling her, by having my own life. That is help. It's just not the help you want me to give. It was the first time I'd ever articulated the concept of enabling to her. The phone line went so quiet I could hear the hum of the refrigerator. I don't know what's gotten into you, she said finally, her voice cold and disappointed. We'll talk later. She didn't call for a week. It was a week of heavy, anxious silence on their end, and a week of intense, purposeful focus on mine. I found a new place, a modern, smaller condo in a building with a secure entrance, no spare keys for anyone. I signed the lease. The conflict was no longer a skirmish over a visit. It was a fundamental clash of philosophies. They believed in the osmosis of family, that resources, space, and emotional energy should flow to the point of greatest need, with no hard borders. I was now insisting on the integrity of the self, the right to own my space, my time, my peace. We were speaking different languages, and because I wouldn't translate my needs back into theirs, I became the problem, the unavailable one, the selfish one. The tension was a living thing, humming just beneath the surface of every truncated conversation. I knew a final, unavoidable confrontation was coming. I just didn't know it would take the form of a set of obsolete keys. The day after my mother's call about giving Chloe the keys, I knew I had to act. I couldn't let my sister drive all the way here, suitcase and trunk, hope in heart, only to be met with a locked door and a sold sign. It would be cruel, and it would make me the villain in their story in a way I wasn't willing to be. I had to tell them. I decided to call my sister directly. It felt like the most honest line. Chloe answered on the second ring. "Hey," she said, her voice lighter than I'd heard it in months. I could hear the relief, the anticipation of escape. "Mom told you? Isn't it perfect? I'm so ready to just breathe. I've already started packing. I was thinking I'd come tomorrow afternoon if that's cool with you." I took a deep breath, leaning against the kitchen counter in my nearly empty home. "Chloe, we need to talk. You can't come tomorrow." "Why? Do you have plans?" "I can work around them. I swear I'll just be a ghost." "It's not that." I could feel my pulse in my throat. "The house, it's sold. I sold it. The closing is in 3 days." The silence on the other end was absolute. It wasn't a thinking silence. It was a void. "What?" The word was a whisper. "I sold the house. I'm moving. The new owners take possession at the end of the week." "You sold it?" Her voice cracked. "When? Why didn't you tell us?" "I decided a couple of months ago. I needed to do this for me. For you." The words were flat, then they ignited. "For you? Do you have any idea what I've been going through? Mom and Dad said you'd understand. They said you had the space. And you were just, secretly packing? Letting us make plans while you knew this whole time it was impossible." She was crying now, sharp, ragged sobs of betrayal. "Why would you do that? Why would you be so cruel?" I let her cry. I didn't try to fix it. "I'm not being cruel, Chloe. I'm living my life. I'm sorry you're hurting. I'm sorry the plans you and Mom and Dad made for my property didn't work out. But they were your plans, not mine." "Your property!" she shrieked. "It was your home. It was family. We're supposed to be there for each other. God, you are so selfish. I can't believe this." There was a muffled sound, like she'd thrown the phone. I heard distant, hysterical yelling. Then my mother's voice, tight with fury, came on the line. "What have you done?" she demanded. "I've sold my house, Mom. You gave Chloe keys to a house that isn't mine anymore. How could you not tell us something this huge? This is a monumental decision. We're your parents." "Exactly. You're my parents, not my owners. This was my decision to make." "This is because we asked her to come stay, isn't it? This is some kind of tantrum to punish us for caring about your sister." I felt a surreal calm. "No, it's because I'm 34 years old, and I want a home that no one else has a key to unless I choose to give it to them. This was in motion long before you offered my space to Chloe." My father's voice, weary and sad, came on in the background. Honey, why all the secrecy? This feels so hurtful. That hurt. His disappointment was the one that could still slice through my resolve. Dad, I wasn't keeping a secret to hurt you. I was protecting a decision I knew you wouldn't understand, a decision you'd try to talk me out of. I had to do it for me. So you just cut us out? He said, his voice crumbling. The conversation spiraled for another 20 minutes. Accusations, tears, my mother's devastated listing of all they'd done for me, my sister's wails in the background. I didn't raise my voice. I just repeated my truth, like a mantra. I sold my house. I am moving. The keys you have won't work. I was an island in a storm of their making, and for the first time, I wasn't getting wet. I was just standing there, watching the waves crash against a shore that was now, legally and irrevocably, mine to define. When I finally hung up, my hands were trembling, but my mind was clearer than it had ever been. The line had been drawn, and I was standing firmly on my side of it. The fallout was instant and icy. My phone blew up with texts, long paragraphs from my mother about family loyalty and the pain I was causing, shattered, emotional messages from Chloe, a brief, sorrowful note from my dad. I wish you had felt you could talk to us. Then, silence. Radio silence. Oh, I was exiled. The next 2 days, leading up to the closing, were the loneliest and most liberating of my life. I finished packing the last of my belongings into a rental truck. I walked through each empty room, saying goodbye not just to the house but to the person I had been when I moved in. The anxious people-pleaser, the ever-accommodating sister, the strong one, who was strong for everyone but herself. I cried, finally. Not tears of guilt, but tears of grief for the family I thought I had, and for the years I'd spent trying to earn a love that was supposed to be unconditional. The closing itself was a dry administrative affair. Sign here, initial there. The keys, my keys, were handed to the smiling new owners. I drove away without looking back. Moving into the condo was surreal. The space was new, neutral. It held no memories, no ghosts. It was a blank page. The silence there was different, not an empty silence, but a clean, promising one. The family silence stretched into a week, then 2. The guilt crept in, of course. The old programming was powerful. Had I been too harsh? Could I have handled it better? Should I have told them sooner? I played the scenarios over and over, but each time I came back to the same conclusion. Any earlier disclosure would have triggered a campaign to change my mind, to guilt me into staying put, into remaining accessible. I had needed the decision to be a fait accompli to find the strength to see it through. Mark was a rock. He didn't try to fix it or trash talk my family. He just listened, made me tea, and reminded me that my feelings were valid. My friends, the few I'd confided in, were unanimously supportive. It's about time, one said, which made me laugh and cry simultaneously. I started seeing my therapist again, and we worked through the tsunami of emotions. She called what I did a boundary of last resort. Not the first line of defense, but the final necessary wall you build when the softer fences have been trampled for years. I missed them. God, I missed the idea of them, the good moments, the shared history. But I didn't miss the dread of the phone ringing, the constant background anxiety of being called into service, the erasure of my own needs. I was in mourning, but it was a clear-eyed mourning. I was grieving an illusion, the illusion that if I was just good enough, quiet enough, accommodating enough, I would be loved in the way I needed. Letting go of that illusion was the hardest and most necessary part. The thaw, when it came, was slow and started from an unexpected place. About a month after I moved, my father called. Just him. His voice was tired but not angry. "Hi, kiddo." "Hi, Dad." "I've been thinking," he said. There was a long pause. "I went into the garage today. I saw that old toolbox of yours, the one you left here when you went to college. It got me thinking about you building that treehouse in the backyard. You were so determined. You didn't want my help. You just wanted to figure out the plans yourself." I remembered. I was 11. I'd spent an entire summer on it, making mistakes, fixing them, refusing all assistance. "I think," he continued, his voice thick. "I think maybe you've been building something else on your own for a long time, and we just didn't see the blueprint, or we didn't want to see it because it was different from the one we had for the family." He took a shaky breath. "Your mother, she's hurt. She feels like you've rejected her, rejected all of us. Chloe is, well, she's Chloe. But I'm trying to understand. Can you help me understand?" It wasn't an apology. It wasn't a full reconciliation, but it was a crack in the door. It was an acknowledgement from the one person whose acknowledgement I secretly craved, that I might have had my own reasons. That was enough. Enough to begin. We talked for an hour. I didn't attack or defend. I just explained. I talked about feeling like a supporting character, about the weight of the strong one label, about my desperate need for something that was just mine, unchallengeable. He listened. He didn't always agree, but he listened. That conversation opened a narrow path. My mother and I have exchanged a few stilted, careful texts. Chloe has not spoken to me. I hear from my dad that she's moved back home with them for a while. The dynamic there continues, but I'm no longer a player in it. I'm a spectator, from a distance that finally feels safe. I've been in my new condo for 6 months now. I've painted a wall a bold color I love. I've made friends with a neighbor. My relationship with Mark is growing, healthily, without the constant background noise of family drama. I am, for the first time, the main character in my own life. It's quieter, less dramatic. Sometimes it's lonely, but the peace is authentic. It's mine. The spare keys to my old house, I have no idea what happened to them. A useless relic, forgotten in a drawer somewhere, I imagine. The keys to my new place are on a ring by themselves. I haven't given out any copies. This wasn't a story about winning or getting revenge on my family. It was a story about surrender. Surrendering the fantasy that I could change them, that I could earn a different role, that love meant never having a locked door. It was about choosing myself, knowing the cost, and deciding I was worth the price. The growth is in the quiet mornings now, in making a cup of coffee and not waiting for the other shoe to drop, in the simple, profound freedom of knowing that my space, my time, my heart are my own to give, not anyone's to take. The family I was born into may never fully understand me, and that's a sadness I carry. But the life I'm building is one I finally understand. And that, I'm learning, is enough. I wonder, for any of you listening, have you ever had to redefine what family means to you? Have you ever had to build a boundary so firm it felt like a wall and learn to live peacefully on your side of it? I'd be curious to hear your stories in the comments below. Thanks for listening.